The Differently Brained team acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands on which we record, edit, and stream this podcast. We pay our respects to all First Nations peoples and their elders past, present, and future. We extend our respect to all First Nations cultures and recognise their ongoing connection to the lands, waterways, and communities.
Just a reminder that Differently Brained shares conversations about mental health and neurodivergence. Sometimes these topics can get a bit heavy, so please remember to check in with yourself before listening. And as always, please reach out for help if our chats have brought anything up for you. Now, on with the show.
Hello, and welcome to Differently Brained, the podcast where no brain is the same. I'm Jacinta Dietrich.
And I'm Lachlan Rutherford. Welcome to our show that we have for you today. And welcome also to a guest that we've got in this studio at this very moment. We're talking to Beau Windon. Beau is a neurodivergent author of Wiradjuri heritage based in Melbourne, Australia. He writes quirky stories about quirky people, including his quirky self, and poetry about all of the dark goo slathered over his mind. Beau won a Melbourne Lord Mayor's Creative Writing Award in 2022 and was one of the winners of Griffith Review's Emerging Writers Competition in 2023. He's received project funding from Creative Victoria, the City of Melbourne, Australia Council for the Arts and Creative Australia. Beau is currently undertaking his PhD on the aesthetic form of neurodivergent literary memoir at RMIT University. And in his spare time, he likes sleeping and chocolate orange. Beau, thank you so much for coming in to the studio today.
Awesome, thank you. And just before we begin, I'd like to respectfully acknowledge the people of the Wiradjuri and Boonwurrung language groups of the Eastern Kulin Nation, on whose unceded lands that we're coming to you from today, and extend that respect to their ancestors and elders, past, present, and emerging. I'd also like to encourage everyone listening here today to kind of consider their own journey across this colonized country, where you were born, where you've lived, where you've worked, and consider the impact and the differences that have abounded from colonization. For myself, as a Wiradjuri man, I would like to acknowledge the Gadigal people and the Yugambeh people, where I was born and where I grew up. And I would like to encourage everyone to consider what our surroundings might look like if it wasn't for the invasions and colonization. The country, which was once a beautiful, healthy land of many vibrant colours, now overrun by capitalist structures with a grey filter from damages wrought upon our lands and waterways. I'd like to encourage everyone to remember the flora and fauna that have been erased from history, a casualty of this uninvited colonization. Encourage everyone to fight for the flora and fauna that are knocking on death's door because of colonization. And I'd like you all to consider how a treaty could contribute to a better way of life for everyone that lives here on so-called Australia. This is, was, and always will be Aboriginal land. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. Acknowledgements, and I don't blame anyone for this because it can be quite a loaded thing to consider. But a lot of times it's done as kind of this expectation that we do this out of respect. We do this out of respect. And I do find that really nice. But then I suppose it's usually a lot of like right-wing and conservative folks who are like, well, what's the point of this? It's just, this expectation that we do this and there's no real point. And so I always like to, with my acknowledgements, kind of really consider why I'm doing it. And I consider, like, what is it that I'm acknowledging? Yeah, and so whenever, I do any kind of public event or appear on, something like this, I like to really, I guess, go deep into it just to kind of get people thinking on that and thinking about the steps they can take and why we do an acknowledgement.
Yeah.
I think that's why I find yours so special. So, you're right. In previous experiences, I always understand the acknowledgement of country and why we do it and things like that. But it wasn't until you took one of our Writers Victoria writability sessions and you make them really unique and really meaningful. And it was the first time that I'd heard something that didn't feel like a standard pre-written kind of thing. And it was really meaningful and really touching. And, you know, I know that it can be hard. Like for our podcast, we do have the pre-recorded one, which comes in at the start every time. And, you know, we absolutely felt it and mean it every single time. It's just that it's recorded and we pop it in because of accessibility in terms of we don't have the time or the energy to do one every episode, because otherwise then our podcast would just be too hard. And I know that sounds terrible, but I think it's really special. You're right, to actually sit down and think about what are you saying and what does it mean. And it was thank you. Thank you for agreeing when I said, can you do one?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And, you know, I do appreciate like how much capacity it takes up. But I think, you know, doing an acknowledgement like this and like having people be not absorbed, what's it called? Exposed. Exposed to it, just, you know, to get the, you know, people's minds kind of moving and thinking about that and thinking why do we do an acknowledgement? What should I be acknowledging and what should I be thinking about?
Yeah. No, I love that. So riffing off your bio, we've already shared that you're neurodivergent and a quirky person.
Yeah.
Tell us a bit about your identity and, you know, how you move around in the world.
Yeah, absolutely. So first off, I love the term neurodivergent.
I feel like I've been hearing mixed things recently. I feel like some people love it and some people really don't.
Yeah, some people really, really dislike it. I personally love it. It has made me a lot more comfortable with being open with myself and like comfortable with my identity. Because I was diagnosed as a child with, I suppose, my little mixed up alphabet, you know, autism, ADHD, OCD, depression, anxiety, all that stuff. Like that was all as a child.
Yeah.
And so for me, I was always like, it was something that I dreaded and was bullied for. And I was like, oh, I hate this. I hate that I'm like singled out and different in this way. And then, you know, it would have only been like 6 or so years ago, like around 2018, 2019, I think, when I discovered the term neurodivergent. And I was like, that sounds like a superpower. Like, it sounds like, you know, I'm a mutant in the X-Men. And I'm like, oh my God, he's neurodivergent. It's like and so I immediately, like, that term, when I heard it, I was like, oh, it just kind of like opened something up for me and helped me start to recover from all of that childhood trauma that had been built around, you know, these diagnostic labels that I was given. And so I love that. So every time I say it and every time I hear my bio read, every time the word neurodivergent comes up, I just see myself in like tights with a cape, like floating in the air. Like, yes, neurodivergent. Yeah, but I do appreciate that it's not for everyone. You know, some people dislike that it's, I suppose, like quite broad.
Yeah.
I like that. And you know, it's funny to me because saying that just makes me so much more comfortable with like spelling out all of the acronyms that have been prescribed to me. Whereas if someone was to ask me about it, if I don't kind of like preload it with like the power of neurodivergence, I'm like, I get all like anxious and sweaty. And I just feel like I'm a kid again that's being pulled out of my class to go into like this special unit. Yeah. But yeah, so the term neurodivergent for me has really like, I attribute that to giving me a whole new confidence in myself. And it's what got me started like writing about, you know, my experiences and, you know, going into this whole track, which has really just opened me up a lot more as a creative, I think.
Yeah. And I think very similar to you, for me, because I'm autistic and an ADHDer and, you know, have anxiety and things like that, it feels like so much when you lay it all out like that. And I don't like ADHDer because it just like my mouth doesn't make that.
Oh, yeah.
And so it's just, and autistic ADHDer is just like really long, whereas neurodivergent feels like very encompassing and it feels community and warm and welcome.
Yeah.
And I totally understand the critique of, you know, some people who, if you do mean specifically autistic, you don't need to say neurodivergent. You can say autistic kind of thing. But for me personally, and I think for others in our community, it's kind of rare to just be one.
That's
to have
it.
only ended up with one identity or one label or one diagnosis kind of thing, which means, for me, neurodivergent feels like it really does hold everything kind of thing. And I feel like, that kinship across all of our neurokin and our wider neurodiverse community, neurodivergent community.
Yeah. And even just, hearing that, like, neurodiverse community, to me, it feels, I don't know, and it might be that superpower thing, right? But it feels more like homely and like, oh, I want to, like, I'm so proud to be part of the neurodiverse community. Whereas when you go into these labels that are prescribed by, medical, I'm doing the bunny ears thing, medical professionals, there's always these kind of like expectations. And, I love the name of this podcast, Differently Brained, because it's like, every neurodivergent person or autistic person, our brains are still like so different.
Yeah.
And you've probably experienced it when, someone finds out you're autistic, or, you tell them, or they meet you and they're like, oh, you don't seem like what I thought you'd be like, or, you don't seem autistic. And it's like, well, there's like, such a huge spectrum.
Yeah.
So yeah, in that way, I'm like, oh, the neurodiverse community, it just feels so much wider, and like, yeah, I feel a lot more like, I suppose embraced by that. Whereas when I hear the autism community, I just like go into like, I kind of seize up, like,
Right.
and I think it is down to, my childhood experiences and stuff. And I remember the whole experience of being diagnosed, and I was terrified of the whole process. And after it all, my parents would always use it as almost like a warning or a threat to like make me behave. Like, if you keep behaving like this, we're gonna have to take you back to that clinic. And I'd immediately like. And so whenever I hear like autism community and stuff, I'm all of a sudden like, oh God, I'm a little kid again, and I'm like, terrified and anxious and like shaky.
Yeah.
Whereas neurodiverse, I'm like, fuck yeah, we're superheroes and we're gonna fuck shit up and save the day.
I love that you said you visualize yourself in like tights and a superhero cape. For me, your superhero outfit is the Beau Daddy tracksuit.
Yeah.
That's what I imagine when you're like, I'm a superhero. I'm like, oh yes, Beau Daddy.
Yes.
So I love that we both also have different superheroes for you specifically.
Oh yeah. My ideal goal would be for everyone that I know to have a different visual of my superhero identity.
Perfect. Brilliant.
Yeah.
So I've got a cheeky little sentence that you've written before that you've already kind of touched on, but we're going to go through it. So you wrote, and I don't remember from where, but I will find it and put it in the show notes.
Yeah.
Being neurodivergent, I'm very used to feeling alienated and isolated from society. So in my writing, I like to explore these feelings and hope it can make others feel a bit less alone. You've already kind of touched on it, but is being neurodivergent a fundamental part of why you write?
Oh, absolutely. Like even before I started writing explicitly about, my own lived experiences and my own experiences with neurodivergence, I was writing fiction, and I still write fiction. It's just that now, I've got a bit of a reputation for my nonfiction. But even before that, with my fiction, all of my characters would very much embody like being, and even before I came out and like was started owning that label when I was studying writing at RMIT, and I was like, no one's gonna know like anything of this about me. My characters were all still I suppose like people would be like, oh, it's coded autistic, but they were that. I just didn't want to give them the label because I wanted to see myself and my own issues, my own discomforts. I wanted to see myself on the page because I very rarely saw that growing up with like reading TV shows and books. And one of the reasons why I've gone into writing nonfiction and memoir so much about myself is, well, in everyday life, I'm quite an oversharer when I talk to people that I'm like comfortable with. I almost went to tell a story that I'm not going to do it. I've got this story that I've been telling everyone. And when I told my mum I was doing this podcast, she was like, just don't tell that story you've been telling everyone. I'm like, okay, cool. So I'm locking that away. But in life, when I talk to people, I will always accidentally go into this oversharing mode. And so when I started writing a lot of memoir, I really put that out there as well and like sharing these experiences. And I've had so much positive feedback and like comments from readers that are like, oh, I'm so glad to see, someone else like have these struggles, or someone else like think of things these way. And so, giving them that kind of outlet to see themselves and to not feel so alone is such a big part of why I write. And, it gives me a lot of confidence with writing about this stuff because it is terrifying. I have a really, my name is unique in that there's only one Beau Windon in the world. You can Google me and I'm the only Beau Windon.
For real?
Yeah, the only Beau Windon. And so it's quite surprising because if I meet anyone and they Google me, you can all of a sudden access all of this memoir, all of these personal essays and find out about me breaking down and crying in grade 5, me having a panic attack in Melbourne Central. All this stuff is so easily accessible because of that unique name.
I genuinely didn't realize the world is so big. How can there I just assumed every name combination had been. Wow.
Oh, yeah, so did I.
That's awesome. Oh, my.
In some ways,
must be great for your SEO and your profile. You must be just wow.
Yeah. It also works out. There's a couple of other writers that live in Melbourne named Beau, spelt with that same B-E-A-U. Mm-hmm. And I think it's just because of the uniqueness of my name that the SEO for that has just bumped me up. So if you Google Beau Writer Melbourne, I'm the first 5 options that come up. Over these writers that, there's quite a poet who's quite world-renowned, Beau Taplin.
Okay.
And he's got millions of followers on social media.
No, you're top shit.
Yeah, but I top him when you Google just to... and I think it's just because of that unique name and that's done so much for my SEO with
That's amazing. Oh.
Yeah.
So cool. Sorry, I totally derailed us and interrupted you.
That's how conversations always kind of go for me.
Is it? So I feel similarly with the podcast where I definitely overshare because, I'm just in a room with friends kind of thing. Yeah. And then next minute I'm putting that into the world and everyone's like, ugh, all right. No one's ever said that. I've never been trolled. We're all good. But is that something that, you're thinking about when you're writing, that eventually that will go out into the world and that will be very easily found and connected to you?
No, because if I think about that, I feel like I would have a heart attack and probably die. Whenever I'm writing something, I always think of it as I'm always writing for myself at some point in my past. Either when I write fiction, all of the time it's okay, I'm writing for 10-year-old me or 12-year-old me. When I write memoir and nonfiction, I'm okay, I'm writing for 20-year-old me or 18-year-old me. So I'm always primarily writing something that I'm I would have appreciated this. And so I put a lot of jokes into my writing that a lot of people probably don't find funny. But I'm this would have made me laugh back then. And it eases the pressure of writing through some things that might be a bit upsetting. And it isn't until, I go through the whole process with an editor and sign off and do the final read through that it hits me and I allow myself to think, people are going to read this.
That's a very late point in the process to be doing that emotional processing.
Oh, it's the only way I could do it though. If I thought about it up top, I feel like I would self-censor too much.
Yeah.
And I think that would it could do more harm than good.
Yeah.
And that it just it would make other if other autistic kids or something read it and they see me self-censoring, then it kind of encourages this idea that we need to hide certain experiences and certain aspects of ourselves.
Or potentially makes them feel like those experiences don't apply to you and they're alone.
Yeah.
And becomes further isolating, which I think is something that we're getting so much better with representation now, but that is something that I think has been really prevalent in the past, that you get very two-dimensional or stereotypical representation where people either have self-censored or it's not the community behind that representation kind of thing. And so then, you've ended up with, I know for me personally, a lot of stuff that I didn't relate to. And I was like, oh, well, I mustn't be autistic. I mustn't be an ADHDer because they have bits that I do, but they don't do all these other things that I was like, oh, well, I only line up with 2 things, not like 10 things or
Yeah.
whatever kind of thing. So have you ever got to the point where you got to that end-ish part and you've pulled the pin? You've just been like, I can't share this?
No, I haven't. I do have a writing group, and my writing group is they're the loveliest group of people. It's a very diverse writing group, very focused on like accessibility and self-care and queer friendly, just kind of really accepting and open to everything. And if I ever do get to the point where I'm like overthinking something, I'll take it to them. And I feel like one of the questions I ask a lot when I share bits of memoir with them will be, do I seem like an arsehole in this? Because I can have a tendency to write quite bluntly, or like, as I'm like exploring like childhood experiences or past experiences, I'm like, and with, an extra decade or something of wisdom, I'm like, God, I was a little dick. I was a real little cunt. Sorry for using
No, that's all good.
And so like that'll be one of the things that I always, share with them, and they give me the encouragement that it's like, no, it's like, I think it's just, you were a child and you were very confused because, you were treated differently to other people. And so they've always been really good at, like, if I've been worried about anything, I suppose, like, they've been good at encouraging me to, like, no, just push forward.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's so lovely. And I think, all writers really need that. But I think writers who are intersectional or, have marginalized identity and things like that really do need that community and that support just to kind of get past those extra imposter syndromes and those extra barriers of just like, ooh.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm very much an introvert, which a lot of people don't believe when they see me like get up on a stage to do a reading or like, talk about this stuff, because I like switch into this mode. But I'm an introvert, and I'm a very isolated person. Some of it is because of like, I suppose like growing into an adulthood and not feeling the same as others, and I isolated myself a bit. And some of it is because I just, needed to be alone to like really charge that battery. Mm-hmm. And so like for ages, like, my entire like teens, early 20s and stuff, I was very much in the mindset like, oh, I don't need friends. I don't need community. I'm good on my own. I'm like a loner, a lone wolf.
A one-man wolf pack.
Yes, one-man wolf pack. Yeah, and I romanticized it a lot. And, I still do spend a lot of time on my own. But it really is so comforting and encouraging to, find people that are open and accepting and that you can go to and talk about these things openly, especially if you're a creative, having people that are going to look at it and, like, if they don't understand the experience exactly, they'll, like, do the mental work to try to understand.
Yeah. This is slightly pivoting.
Yeah.
You already talked about doing memoir as like your area of interest.
Yeah.
And that's what you're doing for your PhD. What is your PhD about, essentially? And also, what does neurodivergent aesthetics mean? What does that look like?
Oh, yeah. So it's very interesting to me. I kind of touched upon earlier how like the medical side of neurodivergence and autism freaks me out a bit. And
Justifiably so, I'd say.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, it's like it feels very dehumanizing. Mm-hmm. And like I am a big reader, and I would always pick up autistic memoirs and read them. And there is so much of that is kind of written for and like designed for the neurotypical eye. It's like the autistic memoir writer can't just write a memoir about their life. They also have to write about autism and like teach the reader.
Yeah.
And so they'll go into, all of this talk about like the process of being diagnosed and everything. And there's like there's a few of those memoirs that have come out in Australia recently, and I read them, and like I enjoy them to an extent, but I'm like, oh, I just wish that it didn't have such a clinical feel to it.
Yeah.
And so with my PhD, what I wanted to do is I wanted to like focus on writing neurodivergent memoir that didn't cater itself to the neurotypical eye and didn't feel a need to like explain and teach. And, you know, kind of if a reader reads something and they don't understand it, you know, they'll go and Google it rather than expect me to tell them. So as I was saying, like my interest in memoir was about like writing explicitly writing myself, not writing about myself and writing about, you know, going to all of these appointments and doctors and therapists and psychiatrists and stuff. I just wanted to write myself. And as I kind of started down that path, I was doing my honours at RMIT, and my supervisor was David Carlin, and he was constantly, you know, pushing me to like go weirder and weirder, and I'd be like, I feel like this might be a little too different, and he'd be like, no, push it further, push it further. And so I got grant funding for a full-length memoir, which is tentatively titled A Proud Failure. And
I love that.
Thank you, yeah. I like, failure is like one of my big obsessions. But that memoir, originally the idea was that every chapter would be written in a different literary form to best encapsulate that experience. And so there's like chapters that are like pure memoir. There's chapters that are like autofiction, poetry, a video game guide, a recipe, a social media comment section. And like I've written about, you know, my experiences in all these different ways that I'm like, okay, this is how I can best share this experience. And so that was my honors. And I came in with that, and like David kept pushing me and like, go weirder, weirder. And then I kind of accidentally developed this mode of writing that I call neurodiverging. And I ran a workshop on it recently, which was really validating. And I'm teaching life writing at the University of Melbourne this semester. And I've been
fancy.
like,
Nice.
yeah.
Done.
I've been like, you know,
You're the go weirder now.
Yeah. I'm the go weirder now. I'm popping that in and like, no, like really like explore yourself. But like because of this, with David like pushing me to go weirder and developing this form of writing that I call neurodiverging, I noticed how different it looked on the page compared to not just other neurodivergent writing, but other writing in general. It was so different. You know, we're taught to write a way where it's like start of a sentence to end of sentence, and like it's got a very clear structure to how it plays out. But our minds don't work like that. Like we think in fragments.
Absolutely.
And I don't know if
or just really, really, really long sentences is my problem. Like I just think in just constant, ongoing, never stop. What's a full stop? You don't need it kind of sentence.
Absolutely. Like I don't. Do either of you have like echolalia?
A little bit.
So I have that, and it can be like quite overpowering at times. And so, like, you know, sometimes I'll be doing something and, like, this phrase, like, from a movie or something that has just, like, been wedged in my head for 15 years, like, kind of takes over. And as I was kind of, like, developing this style of writing, I was like, what if I just, like, you know, when that happens, I put it into the writing? And so the writing is very fragmented because I might be talking about, like, confessing, like, to my first crush and, like, hiding in the bush and crying afterwards because I was so, like, nervous. And that was around the time that the Pirates of the Caribbean movie, the first one, came out. And so there are a lot of phrases from that movie that are like in my head that I like associate with like either anxiety or like, you know, brave up. And so like they would come in my head. And the idea of neurodivergent is instead of like filtering that out, it's like I throw it in. And I throw in all of those like repetitive thoughts and like if I'm thinking really fast and there's no full stops, I smush it together. And so the story that won the Lord Mayor's Creative Writing Prize for disabled stories was an example of that, where it's very fragmented with like multiple voices, and I use things like you know, brackets, italics, all caps to like introduce all of these extra voices and like really just playing with the words on the page and moving it around, smushing things together to try to define a way that like the neurodivergent mind works on paper without like filtering it into this neurotypical style that we're all taught to write in our entire lives. And so like, you know, when I explain this and show it to neurodivergent people or try to teach it, it's difficult to get your head around because we're so brainwashed.
Yeah.
And so that's like the neurodivergent aesthetic.
Right. And it's also like the very nature of it being in those different styles and fonts and italics and all that kind of stuff it becomes tactile. So even if you don't necessarily get it to begin with,
Yeah.
playing around with it, you might like eventually figure it out.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's cool. It's like interactive. I dig it.
Exactly. And it's interactive for, the writer as well, because sometimes I'll do something and like, so, there's multiple different types of brackets. There's like those circular ones, the square ones, and then there's those fun like squiggly ones.
Yeah.
And like I was doing the squiggly ones quite a bit, and I didn't realize until after I'd finished like working on this piece where I was like, oh, that squiggly thing are all of the things that like my dad would say to me when I was younger, and I've like just subconsciously like put
Wow.
that in there, that criticism. Yeah.
I didn't even know there was squiggly ones. I'm like looking at my keyboard. Is
Yeah,
that like a
it's-
special character or something?
Yeah. When you find them,
I love it.
yeah.
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 I
Oh,
love
yeah,
them.
those ones.
Yeah,
I know what you're
yeah.
talking
For the
about.
benefit of
Like-
the audience, we were just doing squiggly brackets in the air.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It was really fun.
Yeah, it's a very fun hand motion. I encourage anyone listening to like go to your keyboard and like look for it, and then just do it with your fingers. I'm doing it constantly now because I'm like, oh, actually, it's
feels
like
nice.
a really pleasing
Yeah.
action.
So you obviously had, David there helping you push Go Weirder, and having that support to kind of unmask and explore different things. How do the rest of us do it?
Yeah.
Because it's something that I absolutely hadn't considered and stuff. And now looking at my writing, I'm like, well, yeah, there's a very specific way that I write that is, still me fitting in with what I've been taught kind of thing, but then also just how like my brain thinks, and it's kind of a meshing of both those things. And then I'm like, I don't even know how I write anymore. Who am I? What's going on?
Yeah.
So thanks for that identity crisis and that
Yeah, you're welcome.
existential writing moment. How do you unmask?
Yeah, it is tough, and like I said, I ran a workshop trying to introduce these ideas, and I've tried running exercises in this life writing class to introduce these ideas of like really unmasking and putting like your authentic mind on the page. I like I don't want to self promote or anything.
Please do.
Please do.
You're great.
Yeah, but like I feel like one of the easiest ways to first get into that mode is to see an example. And so like if you go to my website, there's I think there's a link to the winning story that's like written in that mode of neurodiverging. And if there isn't, I will put one there before this releases. But I think, being able to have a look at that and see what I'm kind of talking about and see what I've done can kind of show you like, a bunch of different like tools that I've done. And then it's really just about, there's no one way to do it. Like, being neurodivergent, there's no one way to do it. It depends on how your brain works and what feels right to you. Just pushing through that filter and like removing that mask from your writing is challenging. But once you see, I suppose it's like anything. Once you see someone doing it with like such wild abandon and having fun with it, it's like, oh, I want to do that. Actually, when I had my honors, marked, one of the people that marked it was Peter Murray. And they gave me my little thesis report, honors report, writing in a neurodiverging style. So
amazing.
using that.
Oh,
That's so good.
Oh, yeah. I was so stoked.
Yeah.
So stoked with that. And they've actually come along since, and I think they were on my PhD confirmation panel. It was Peter Murray, Rose Michael, and someone else. Bonnie Cassidy was there because she's my co-supervisor. I can't remember.
I love that though. That's such a like validating and exciting thing for them to do that
Yeah.
they absolutely didn't have to. And it
Yeah.
was just like, that's so cool.
Yeah.
Like you made a thing and they did it back and you're just
Yeah.
like, oh my God, I'm losing my shit for you.
yeah, and I got a really good grade as well. But the number didn't matter at all. I was just like stoked with the
Yeah.
report and like seeing that thrown back at me. I was like, oh my God, it was incredibly validating.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
so wonderful. I want to know, how does that go in terms of, obviously you're doing the PhD and things like that. So like you've got the freedom to play and work on that stuff and everything. But when it comes to eventually like publishing or getting an agent or any of those other sides of writing and making money from writing, how are you navigating that side of things and being, at the forefront of this very different type of writing, knowing that, our publishing industry is a bit behind.
Yeah, yeah. How am I navigating it? Very poorly. I think.
It doesn't seem like you're very poorly from your bio.
Yeah, it doesn't and people always say that when I'm like, oh, I really struggle with this aspect of it, or even with the title of my memoir being a proud failure, they're like, oh, it's funny that you're having so much success, and you're writing this entire book centered around like failure. But I feel like I notice it a lot more because, and you guys might be able to relate to this, but whenever I get any professional correspondence, or I'm horrible with emails.
Same.
Emails. If they're an industry professional, I'm even worse because I've got like this intimidation about it.
Yeah.
And so, I've had like editors email me and like, hey, if you've got anything, long form that you want to submit to us, any books or anything, would love to read it. And I see the email, I freak out, and then I will leave it a week, and I'm like, okay, it's been a week, you need to reply to this. And then it'll be 2 weeks. And I'm like, has it been too long to reply now? And then it ends up going on for months until someone will be like, just reply and be like, I'm so sorry. I had a personal crisis or something.
And then the added pressure of the longer it goes on, you're like, well, I'm never going to make it in the industry.
Yeah.
They hate me. I've just tanked my career because I couldn't do it. Yep.
Hard relate.
Yeah. Oh, it's tough. And one of my hyperfixations is writing. So I write a lot of content. On average, I write about 2,000 words a day.
Holy shit.
Yeah. I write a lot. It's how I understand the world, and it brings me joy and makes me feel more connected to reality. So I write a lot. And I always say to people when they ask, oh, do you have like a book or something? I'm like, not yet, but once I connect up with some publisher, I'm probably going to be putting out multiple books a year because I've just got
such a back catalog.
Yeah, such a back catalog. And then, I'm still every day, writing more and more. I would have hit, what is it they say, 10,000 hours to be good at anything. I would have hit that decades ago.
Oh my gosh.
So yeah, that aspect, the writing, the polishing of works, that is a joy for me. When it comes to submitting work to publishers, pitching to literary journals and stuff, that is where I really struggle. I'm lucky that I've got a connection now with Griffith Review. They've published a few of my stuff. And it was because the original editor I worked with, Carity, who's the head editor now, but she was so lovely with working with me and being so sensitive and open to things. And she checked in every now and then after I had published that first piece, which was published from a slush pile. So I had just submitted it. I did this challenge in 2020 where I was like, I'm going to submit to one writing opportunity every week for the entire year.
Nice.
But my goal wasn't to get published or anything. It was just to submit.
Yeah.
That was the victory. And that one came towards the end of the year. But then a year later, I think it was 6 months later, she reached out and she was like, just touching base if you've got any ideas that you want to pitch to me. And I was like, oh, yeah, thank you. I'll keep that in mind. And then she reached out another 6 months later. And now it's at the point where with Griffith's Review, I'm super comfortable if I have an idea to pitch to them. And I think that's something that if publishers and editors want neurodivergent stories, want disabled stories, they do have to do a bit of extra work because we're so used to self-rejecting. We're so used to holding ourselves back and building up way more anxiety than, neurotypical, or I like to use this phrase that I find encapsulates non-disabled people, able-body-minded.
I like that.
Yeah. And so these able-body-minded, writers that don't have this extra barrier to getting in. And I think more professionals in the literary industry need to do that extra work, because if Carity hadn't done that extra work with reaching out, a couple of times, then I wouldn't have published so often in Griffith. And publishing in Griffith, so regularly
it's
has really raised it's raised my confidence, it's raised my profile. Yeah. So I just wish there were more publishers and editors out there like Griffith Review and like Carity.
Yeah, willing to, come back and do the comfortable level stuff to...
Let this be a clarion call to publishers and editors to step up their game. Maybe.
And also
Yes.
an apology to all the people sitting in my email. I know you exist and I am coming back for you. I'm so sorry.
Also, apologies to the ones sitting in my email inbox. Every day I open it up and I look at it and feel this immense weight of shame, and then I'm like, another day.
Yeah.
I'll do it tomorrow, probably. Like, that's when I'll have it together.
Okay, Beau, important question.
Yes.
What have been the best representations of neurodivergence that you've come across? Fictional, non-fictional, media references, anything. Give us what you got.
Thank you. Yeah, that is an interesting question, and I find whenever I talk about representation in this way, I have to remember that I headcanon a lot of fictional characters as neurodivergent, so I can get a bit muddy there. But one of my favorites and it was one of the ones that I don't even know if they were actually like officially declared as being like neurodivergent. It's very clear from watching the show. But have you guys seen Community?
Yep.
Abed?
Yep.
In that? Yeah. I watching that when it came out and just thinking, a lot of people would be like, oh, Abed is this weird, quirky character. And I'd be like, oh my God, this is like me.
Yeah.
The obsessive need to talk about something, in his case, movies. In my case, and I'm better at it now, but I was always, my way of connecting to people and was talking about professional wrestling. And still to this very day, when I need to understand something, I convert it into professional wrestling lingo in my head. So I'll be like, okay, I'm a baby face now, but like these people are really irritating me, so I'm gonna have to like make a heel turn, drop a promo that's gonna like really turn the crowd on me, and build up some heat so I can get out of this situation.
Oh my God,
which wouldn't make sense to people unless you know
Yeah.
wrestling. Yeah.
Yeah, I have no idea what you just said, but I was just stoked
so
about the
good.
whole thing. I was like, yeah,
Yeah.
bring the heat, Daddy Beau.
Yeah, that's it. Daddy Beau, bring in the heat. Yeah, and so like when I saw, Abed doing that, and I was like, oh my God, that's like my wrestling thing. He's doing my wrestling thing, but with like movies and stuff.
Yeah.
And then even like, Abed has some like sims and stuff that he does in it. And I was obsessed with that show and obsessed with that character when it came out. And like I said, I don't know if they ever came out and was like, he's autistic. He very clearly is.
Yeah.
So that's my all-time like favorite. But there's also like some writers. I suppose they're academic writers, and this comes from like doing my PhD. But I just really appreciate they've been what's influenced me a lot with pushing myself. Nick Walker, who wrote this fantastic book called Neuroqueer Heresies.
Okay.
Really, really fantastic book about the neurodiversity paradigm. And Phil Smith, who he's written a few books, but he's got a lot of really fantastic journal articles out there as well about they work in like their field of academia is mad studies.
Ooh.
And so they proudly call themselves mad. And I've kind of taken that label on as well because I'm like it feels fitting. Traditionally, like if you see me overwhelmed around people and I'm like stimming and kind of like I would always when I was younger I would be really self-conscious about it. Because of the way I look as well, quite alternative, people would assume that I'm on drugs and I'm like freaking out when really I'm just like trying to gain control over myself. And I've got so many memories of like people being like, watch out for that mad person over there.
Yeah.
So when I saw these two academics, writing about neurodivergence and depression and mental health issues and calling themselves mad proudly, I was like, yes, I love that. Yeah.
That is brilliant.
Great.
Thank you. Yeah, I read Nick Walker for part of my PhD submission.
Oh, yeah.
And I haven't run into anyone else and I was like, yay.
I just adored it. I adore all of their work.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Well,
Thank you so much for coming on, Beau. It's been absolutely delightful to chat with you and to learn so much about the aesthetics of neurodivergence. Yeah, I love it. I love it so much.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. I know I've been harassing you for ages. I probably got very annoying.
Oh no, not at all. I'm for any other listeners out there that ever want me to do something, I'm the type of person you need to harass because I'm like, you know, some people say flaky, but I'm just very erratic and I forget things and just harass me if you want me.
Well, it's been absolutely...
That sounded weird. But harass me.
Yeah.
It's been absolutely delightful. Thank you so much.
Thanks,
I've learned so much from you before this and from this and probably will after this. Thank you for being part of our community.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks so much for hanging out with us for another episode of Differently Brained. If you want to learn more about something that we talked about today, head to our show notes. If you want to hang out with us, yay, thanks! You can join our private Facebook group where we chat all things podcast, mental health, and neurodivergence in a safe and warm community. If Facebook isn't your thing, fair enough. You can find us on Instagram at Differently Brained Podcast. And while you're there, Lachlan and I would also love a follow on our personal pages too if you're in the mood. If you want to get in touch with us via email, we are differentlybrainedpodcast@gmail.com.
Differently Brained shares the opinions of individuals and does not consider your personal circumstances. Differently Brained exists purely for information purposes and should not be relied on as health or medical advice. Because no brain is the same, please consult your healthcare professional for your personal medical needs.